Welcome everyone to Real Talk, Women, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I want to make a quick offer to you. If you'd like a 30-minute consultation on your next best steps on how to help drive diversity, equity, inclusion, be sure to type into the chat, consultation, and then we will be sure to get in contact with you and help you figure out what's your next best move. How can you make a difference with diversity, equity, and inclusion? So I just want to say welcome again. And I'm so happy to be having this conversation. I am here with a dear friend of mine that we've worked with over the years. I've worked with her teams as a consultant and leadership and team coaching, that sort of thing, Tommy English, as well as my business partner and sister. So I've known her a long time, longer than Tommy, my whole life, Cynthia Medaglia. So let's get started because I know, your time is valuable and we really honor and respect your time, and thank you for giving us your time. And so we are talking about women, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're going to tackle some difficult topics that the three of us often discuss over when we're working together. And one of the topics we're going to talk about is assimilation or switching. And if you don't know what that is, you need to know what that is. What it's like to be falsely accused of racial discrimination when you haven't done something like that. Unconscious bias and how that may be playing out in our behaviors, as well as you hear people say, well, I don't see color. But we're going to talk about why it's important to see color and see differences and what does that really mean in the role of diversity, equity, inclusion. And then we're also going to provide tips for change because Cindy and Tommy have been through a lot of these things as leaders. And I'm really much more your host. I'm Susan Robertson, and I am the founder of Lindsay's Conscious Business. So I want to thank everyone for your questions. You had some of the questions that you had, and we're looking to address them as we go through this conversation, is how to have the tough conversation with peers or maybe friends or family when you know that they are, if you will, stereotyping or being racially biased. And how do you do that with somebody at work? And how do you advocate with senior leadership? How do you bring up these kinds of conversations and bring it up in a healthy way? Because we're going to talk about what it means to be an angry, fill in the blank kind of person. And whether you're a woman or you're a Black woman. And how to have difficult conversations within your teams to make sure that we are letting go of unconscious bias and really giving everyone equal opportunity. So we're going to get started. And the first person I'd like to introduce, and I've got a zillion questions for her, is Tommy English. She is the founder of Auth Intentional Coaching. And you're going to figure out why she named her organization Auth Intentional Coaching. It was not by accident. She spent 25 years leading others in nonprofits as well as corporate America, Fortune 100 company. And as a woman and a person of color, in one of her major roles, she was in, we did the math yesterday, the 0.3% club of her organization and being a senior leader and a woman of color. She has always been passionate about diversity and equality long before it became a trend that it is today. And she's going to be sharing with us what it was like to spend a lot of her life assimilating and switching and what that really means and why that led her to really advocate for people of difference. And in her case, of course, there's a particular passion around people of color, how she advocated, how she faced it, and then how she changed it being a senior leader in the organization. So welcome, Tommy.
Thank you.
I'm going to introduce Cindy. So Cindy spent 30 years leading diverse teams. She is the COO. I was a bad salesperson. It took years to get her to work with me. She is the COO of Lindsay's Conscious Business, and she's passionate about providing equal opportunity for everyone. This has been a lifelong stance of hers. However, at one point in her career, not that long ago, she was accused of racial discrimination. And she began an internal search that did she actually live and preach what she said she lived and preached? Or did she have unconscious behavior and bias? And as a result of the experience, rather than becoming angry, which she could have, and she could have developed a stereotype toward those kinds of people, it became even more of a passion to create equality for everyone. And then I'm Susan Robertson. I'm the co-founder of Lindsay's Conscious Business. I've written a book, a best-selling book called Real Leadership, Wake into Wisdom. I have another book coming out called Real Culture. I've always been passionate about honesty, resilience, compassion, and authenticity, as well as equality. That was one of the things when I started working with Tommy. I was very grateful to Tommy, I guess about 10 years ago, when she hired me to work with her team. She was the head of a call center. And, I've always been passionate about helping people become better, because if people and leaders become better, they create better workplaces and profits take care of themselves. So for 32 years, this is the kind of work I've done to continually transform, help companies transform and help leaders transform. So Tommy, my first question for you is, you spent many years, unfortunately, but it was the only thing you knew to do, switching and assimilating before recognizing that authenticity and being your true self was the best way to live and then to lead your people. And I'm also going to tell a secret about Tommy. She's highly competitive. And I also know, because I saw the name, that one of her former employees is on our webinar today. And so Tommy was able to really create a culture where they wanted to win and win together. So Tommy, tell us your secret. What was it like to have to switch and assimilate? And how did you come to the insight that instead of switching and assimilating, that being authentic was really the best way to go?
Well, thank you, Sue, for having me on, and for all of the opportunities that you've given me in the past and this opportunity today. And you're right, I am super competitive. I am an extrovert and I love people. And I had a lot of opportunities in my career to be able to be in senior leadership roles. And in the beginning, being in a senior leadership role, and most of the time being the only Black woman, um, it was it was frightening. It was scary. And instead of showing up as me many times, I felt the need to switch. Or sometimes people call it the imposter syndrome. Should I really be here? Why would I ask that question? Because I didn't see other people at the table that looked like me. But I'm also one of those people who are very grateful. Even though I didn't see other people that looked like me, I was grateful that I was there to represent people who didn't look like me. But in many cases, I would switch. I would not be the competitive person that I am. I would try to listen and be quiet instead of being the outspoken person that I am. There was an example of one time when I went to a leadership training and I had seen the list of participants that were going to be at that training for a week. And I knew that I was going to be the only Black woman, the only Black person in that training. So I had decided that I was not going to show up authentically as me. I was going to show up. I was going to be a sponge. I was going to learn, watch what everybody else was doing because I was the only one who looked like me, and just take it all in. I got to that training with that in my mind. We introduced ourselves, and then the facilitator said, now, I want you guys to write down, based on the introductions, whether you would want to work for each person that introduced themselves and why or why not. And so I got this, we did this, and one lady wrote down that she would not want to work with me because she would be afraid to drop a pen. She would
So
be,
that you would be highly critical or something.
and as we talked about it, she just thought that I would be very controlling, I would be very conservative or aggressive. And the only thing that I could think, because I went in deliberately saying, I am going to, not show up authentically, that it had to be that I was Black. And as we went through that whole week of training together, on that Friday, when we reported out again, this same, and she was an executive in a senior leadership role. She cried at the end of that session and she apologized to me. And she said she don't know why she said that in the beginning, but that not only would she love to work with me, she would find it an honor to work for me. So it was just one of those things where I knew I needed to switch, but then again, that was a lesson of don't switch, because no matter what you do, you're going to show up. You're going to show up. So how
That's,
do you show up?
I want to emphasize that no matter what you do, whether you switch or don't switch, there's a part of your true reality of who you are that's going to come out anyway. So I think that was part of like, well, then why not just be myself?
Right.
Right. Exactly. So I want to come back to that. And I want to go to Cindy now and ask her, as a white woman leading diverse teams, oftentimes you were the only female, you were in a small percentage, but at times you were the only woman racially speaking too. And you had always advocated for the equal opportunity. And you took pride in working with people and advocating on their behalf to help them grow. And we're going to talk about this later. And in your mind, you didn't see color. You were trying to be equally promoting. And yet you found yourself in a situation where you were falsely accused of racial discrimination. I'm happy to say that, she was exonerated. But being the primary breadwinner in her family, I know this was a scary time for you, and it caused you to do a lot of soul searching on your own behavior. So what was it like to be falsely accused when you felt like you spent your whole life advocating for equality for everyone, no matter who they were, race, color, creed, or sexual orientation?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on today. I'm excited to be with both of these wonderful ladies. When I was first brought into the office and advised that I'd been accused, that there was an accusation that I had been racially discriminating, against one of my employees, I immediately was like, well, that's ridiculous. There's no merit to that. And then when I realized through the conversation, I knew in my mind that this is a very serious accusation. What unfolded after that made it even more serious.
Because it took a 6-month investigation, and they looked at your leadership over 15 years.
Yes, they did. And during that whole process, everyone was radio silent, of course, because they've got an investigation to conduct, and they need to be sure that they're protecting the employee. However, it was an anonymous tip or anonymous complaint that was placed. And so they felt compelled to investigate, like you said, 15 years of my leadership, 20 to 30 of my direct reports over a 4-state coverage during my tenure there to ultimately say not guilty. But during that 6 months, I was kind of watching my back, and who could say something like that? And I started to second guess myself. I started to wonder, geez, did I actually do something that was completely out of line and not really know it? You start to, the more the time drug on, the more I started to second guess myself. And it was like, no, I've always treated people the way I wanted to be treated. It didn't matter if they were male or female, sexual preference, color of their skin. It never mattered. But this got very real, very scary. And fortunately, after 6 months, my name was cleared. And, to this day, I don't know who that employee was. Obviously, they were disgruntled. But yeah, it was a very, very scary situation.
Yeah. And that led you to, rather than becoming bitter and angry, I think it led you, as a result of your soul searching, to do what?
Well, number one, it just reinforced that no matter how deep they looked or how far back they looked or how many people they spoke to, I had the integrity. that what I'd always put out there is exactly what I lived. They couldn't find a thing as to any merit, not a thread of truth to this false accusation. And it really compelled me to continue to lead the way that I'd always led. And now in this new role, really be able to provide a service and help other leaders navigate these waters, because it's really important that that we do treat each other with kindness and compassion, no matter what their station in life is, whether they're a direct report to me, whether they're my peer, whether they are my superior. We all have a job to do.
Yeah. And so I want to come back to Tommy, because in this way, you both are saying somewhat the same thing: being authentic, being true to yourself, living out your values, being consistent. And so some people think those are like soft words in terms of leadership and culture, but I'm going to come back and pick on you, Tommy, because we have such a great relationship. But I also know you are highly competitive, and there are a number of call centers around the world, right? And you were always game to make sure your call center won. So tell us what you did, because you had a very diverse team, and winning really meant, beating everybody else's CSAT scores and things like that. So how did you build a diverse team? How did you advocate, and how did you win?
So I come from a family of 12. I always have to tell people that. So I love people, and I love building teams, and I love working with leaders. And so one of the things that I have worked very hard on is making sure that feedback happens. Feedback, we say, is a gift, but sometimes feedback can hurt. I mean, when people tell you the truth, and when you do get feedback, you want truth. So I have always, when creating a team or working with a team, sought the truth, and made sure that we had an open forum where everybody has a voice. And sometimes it has created conflict, but in order to achieve trust, we need conflict. And in order to break through conflict, and to get to a high performance team, we need to have those dialogues. So I've always been very open in having those difficult dialogues, and then making sure that I communicate frequently, and always explaining the why. A lot of times people don't want to follow you. They don't want to be a part of something because they don't know why. And if I didn't know why, I didn't have a problem saying, I don't know why. I don't know why we're doing this, right? I don't know, but I'll find out. But one of the things we came up with as a team was duty before complaint. Let's get it done, implement, and we'll perfect, and I will get more information. And then winning, I think the winning part, Sue, just comes from being a family of 12 and trying to get my piece. But in a team, when you have a high performing team, you will win. You will want to win, and you'll want to win for the right reasons, for the customers, for your employees. When I was a young leader, I used to have my leaders wear a spoon on their tops or their shirts, to put a spoon on it, taped to it. And they said, well, what does this mean? This means that you're a servant. You're a servant leader. You're here to serve. You're here to take care of the customer. You're here to take care of your employees, and you're here to take care of each other.
So when I remember when I worked with your team for the first time, I remember feeling scared, because I knew that I would be not like everybody. And there was a particular issue we needed to work on. And, we've always said, and I've always said that if you really want to build trust, and you want to build inclusion, and you want people to feel like they belong, you must talk about the issues that prevent inclusion, belonging. You have to talk about the issues of breaking trust in order to build it. But not everybody wants to go there, because it is a difficult conversation to have. And so, one of the things that we always say that we do is that we facilitate. Well, facil means to make easy. to make it easy to have these kinds of conversations. So Cindy, I would like to ask you, because you had, even though, again, diversity, equity, inclusion wasn't the big words back, 5 or 6 years ago when you were facing the racial discrimination charge. How did you make easy to have those conversations so that, and I'm assuming that you guys had to have the same kinds of conversations, even though you never, would have called it having a difficult conversation?
Well, basically, I think what you're asking me is how did I navigate the waters with my team in general?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So there's a label for it now in our little business, and we call it the circle of trust and empowerment. But I didn't know that that's actually what I was doing. Anytime that I had a team or I had a new addition to the team, and if the new addition to the team came with baggage, people, oh, I don't know, you got a good one there. You're going to really have your hands full. I allowed that individual to check that baggage at the door. You have a clean slate with me. I'm going to train you. Everyone had equal access to being able to learn the skill and be able to, perform the job. Even though I always had the right to assign, and I stayed away from that. I made sure that I did it equally so that I was never accused of favoritism, or in this case, discrimination, although I was still accused of discrimination. But in that circle of trust and empowerment, I made sure that they all were trained up, that they had the capability. I made sure that they knew that this was their responsibility and I was counting on them. And then I also gave them the authority to perform the task. And at the end of the day, and back to what you said, Tommy, it's about accountability and it's about providing feedback and touching base and how's this working for you? And if I came across errors or had issue, let's come back to the individual. Let's point them out, make sure that they have the skills that they need so they're not making that same mistake again. And again, I'm right back into, you're capable. You've been trained. You are now responsible. You have the authority. I'm holding you accountable. And it just goes round and round. And when you invest time with your people and emotional labor with your people, guess what? They surprise you. They deliver. They give 110%. That's success to me.
Yes. And that was one of the things I noticed, Tommy, when we did work with your team, that you invested time, you took the time to have those difficult conversations. So when people say, how do you have those conversations? Well, one of the very first things you have to do is set aside the time to do it. Mm-hmm. Then you have to be brave to actually bring up the topic, whatever the topic is, and be able to talk about it. And so one of the things that we actually talked about is like, you don't always ask this as a white person, but like, Tommy, when do we say Black versus person of color versus African American? And because for a while there, you couldn't say Black and be a white person and say Black thinking it would be offensive. Mm-hmm. So then Cindy would be walking around on eggshells, making sure she's not stepping on anyone's toes, not quite the same thing. But you would take the time, and you even had somebody that accused you of inequality.
Yes. Feedback. We really prided ourselves in the corporate sector on getting feedback, and even in a nonprofit. But one feedback that I had gotten was that if you were not Black, you could not come in my office.
Wow.
You not just come in my office and sit down. And that feedback really, really bothered me because I worked really hard on building those relationships and making sure that I had an inclusive environment. But when you self-reflect, because when you get feedback like that, you have to ask yourself, is this true? And I realized that 95% of my team that reported directly to me was Black. And so it was pretty easy for me to kind of figure out where that feedback came from. And I did have that conversation with the employee to say, what makes you feel that you can't come in and sit and talk with me? You know, what can I do to make you comfortable? And she said, everybody else just walks in, they sit down and they just start talking, and I don't. And I said, why don't you? And she says, I don't know. It just seems they're comfortable. I'm like, what can I do to make you comfortable? So that you can come in, because you're a part of the team, you're a part of the family. So it just happens to be that most of the family is Black, but you're a part of the family. And it was funny because 10 years later, this same person came in my office and didn't have an appointment or anything and wasn't reporting to me, came in and said, oh, I need to talk to you, plopped down in a chair, threw her legs across the chair and started to tell me some things. And I laughed. And she said, what are you laughing at? I said, look at you. And she said, what? I said, you just came in here, you just plopped down, you sat down and you started talking. And I said, I'm so proud of you. You know, I'm so proud of you for being comfortable. Because before that was her perspective, that was her view. And a lot of times when you don't see people that look like you start to have those views, those thoughts. And that's why it's important that we focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because people need to see people that look like them, or know that even if I don't look like you, you know, I'm a part, I'm at the table, I'm important. You hear me, you see me, right?
Exactly. So we have a question here. Have you ever worked with men with regard to inclusion, and what is different in working with women? So I want to take that from the perspective as being an executive coach. And I would have to say most in terms of where I've worked, oftentimes I too was the only female at the table, you know, working executive coaching, cultural transformation, working with senior leaders. And you see, as my sister and business partner would say, nothing but vanilla and male vanilla. But yet, I think Cindy and Tommy, you probably have, you know, so I've dealt with more having women feeling like they can lean in and have a seat at the table. But I also know that the two of you, many of the people in the organizations you worked with and the people that you led, because Tommy, you had something like a call center of like 2,500, 3,000 people reporting to you. A lot of that group is women. And so men had to fight their way in. So if you guys could address that question, that would be great.
You want to go first, Cindy?
Again, you know, I always wanted to be very cautious that I was not seeing color, that I was not discriminating for men versus women. It was very intentional for me because they've chosen this particular position to work with me. When it came to including the men, it didn't matter. If we had a meeting, we had a meeting. And most times when it came to women, you know, they just can chat it up and joke around and really be comfortable. And most times men were the minority in the room when it came to my teams. And what I would do is I would just create the environment to allow everyone to give feedback. I wouldn't call out the man or the men. I would make sure that everyone had a voice at the table, no matter what we were discussing, whether it was a new business or a new training or an idea on how can we make things better. Because I would always hear from the same people. You always hear from the same extroverted individuals, and you want to hear everyone's voice. So when it came to men, that's how I would prompt them to feel more inclusive when the women really dominated the room.
And how about you, Tommy? Because I know, if I remember correctly, the first time I worked with your team, there was one, maybe two team, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And in both in the nonprofit and corporate sector, I've had men, but more women on my team, but I've had men. And I can say that from a coaching perspective, one-on-one, I enjoy coaching with men because men tend to get straight to the point, right? And they think they know what they want, although sometimes they don't always know what they want. And you can have a healthy dialogue or agreement to disagree and walk out and still be okay. Whereas with some of the women that I've worked with, sometimes it's harder to get to in alignment. Sometimes you have to continue to have the dialogues. And so to me, having that diversity at the table is very important. And most of the times I've had experiences where men tend to want to dominate the conversation, or I don't know what the term is sometimes when they do parroting, right? The woman has said something and they come back and they say something, the same thing, but they say it in a different way.
Suddenly it's heard, right?
Yeah.
I've never had that.
Or if a lot of women are in the room and they're really being chatty and talking, having that social awareness to say, okay, guys, hold up. We haven't heard from Joe over there. Joe, what are you thinking? And usually Joe is thinking a lot, particularly if he's an introvert. The extroverts are going to get in there, but your introverts, whether it's a man or woman, particularly with men, you have to be aware of who's doing all the talking and who haven't you heard from, and be able to call that out. For sure.
Thank you. So I want to have one more question, and then we're going to go back to what are your tips? So Cindy, very quick question. Somebody has asked, what were your range of feelings during the 6-month investigation?
Oh, well, first I was shocked and dismayed. I couldn't believe the audacity of the accusation. And then I became terrified, because of the accusation. And if they found a thread of truth, I'd be, out of a job after 30 years working there, being the main breadwinner. I felt threatened. I didn't feel that I could really trust anyone around me because I didn't know who had made this accusation. And then I had to really dig deep in myself and say, okay, you know what you stand for. You know what you wouldn't be as successful as you've been with your teams and these individuals in these relationships if you'd been doing it wrong all this time. So, believe in God, put your faith in the process and in yourself, and just do you. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, over time, it finally, like I said, huge success story that I was not guilty of it, and that I could continue doing what I've been doing all along.
But there's a follow-up question in the chat where they're asking, do you feel that there are senior leaders in business, and now that you're a consultant and working in other business, that, in a way, if there's smoke, there's fire? There's likely something to it, even regardless of the evidence. Now, you were exonerated. They thoroughly investigated you. But do you think that kind of thinking is out there? And what have you seen? And
so we're all human, right? So even though it is confidential, and even though it was completely radio silent to me, when the investigation was over, I had almost all of the senior leaders, all the way up to the CEO of my family, meaning the company I work for, as well as my parent company, reach out to me and say, we knew, we're sorry that this happened. We knew that this was false, but we had to go through the process. I'm sorry it was painful. I'm sorry you felt guilty, waiting to be proven innocent. They came through after the fact. And I just think it's the nature of the confidentiality and compliance and having to go through that. I hope that, no one on this webinar or anyone that witnesses this webinar ever has to go through what I went through. But senior leadership let me know that they still believed in me, and they knew from the very beginning that there's no way.
Yeah. And generally speaking, what we've seen as consultants, and Tommy, I think you've seen it, there's generally a feeling like, I don't know, when accusations like this get made, you're going to if there's smoke, you're going to generally have one or at least more than one, and it will come out. Mm-hmm. And that's where there is smoke, there's fire. But clearly in your case, Cindy, they were digging and digging. And I think because they probably thought that.
Well, even in mine,
there was one person, then maybe,
right.
Maybe. you
Well,
know,
even when I was going through the interview process of this investigation, the questions were so vague that I walked out of there thinking, they got nothing. There wasn't a specific situation or incident that they were really questioning me about. Everything was very vague and open ended. But they still had to do due diligence to make sure that these employees were protected and that I was not doing what I was being accused of.
so we're to that point where I want to ask a couple things. We've only got, I'm doing a time check, 10 minutes. So the advice, what would you give? And somebody's asking a question. So what advice would you give in order to advocate more when you're inside of an organization in terms of, if you're a leader, no matter what level, maybe you're an individual contributor, maybe you are a leader, to give equal access or to begin to help that internal change? What would be one piece of advice you'd give? As well as, we have a question here that says, could you speak more about how you were able to build a positive relationship with the individual who accused you of not being impartial and who wasn't coming to you? What methods did you use and how long did it take? So you've got a couple questions here, ending with what one main tip would you give for somebody's next step for creating more diversity, equity, inclusion?
So to answer the question, which would be part of my tip, is being aware and seeking feedback. I mean, and sometimes the biggest opportunity that we miss is to get the feedback. And getting feedback doesn't mean that you can always fix it, but at least you're aware. With that particular employees and other employees throughout my tenure, having those discussions and not sitting on it, because the longer you sit on an issue, or if you get some feedback, the longer you wait, the worse it gets. So I've always prided myself on going for it quickly, right? Within 48 hours or right away, dealing with conflict, dealing with misunderstanding, and then making sure that I have empathy, that I understand where the other person is coming from. Asking myself, is this true? Is this something you need to work on? And so I was able to build a relationship with that employee and a multitude of employees just by being open to feedback and being authentic in explaining whether I understood or trying to figure out what I could do differently. One of my tips that I can share with you, because I had such diverse leaders and teams in my tenure, was to put in this training, we had got these questions about diversity and inclusion. I put it in my office in front of me where I could see it. And it asks, who are you including? Who are you excluding? Who are you speaking to? Who are you not speaking to? Who do you go to? Because sometimes we have biases about who we go to ask them to do work, because maybe they do it like we do it. Who are you going to and who are you not going to, right? And looking at that every day and asking myself, what do I need to do differently? So not only seeking feedback, but be willing to make a change, right? Because if you're getting feedback and you're not willing to even think about it or think about what kind of change could be made, then it's just feedback, right? And then be the change initiator. Ask yourself, does something need to be said or does something need to be done? Does it need to be done by you? Or does it need to be done by somebody else? And does it need to be done now or later? And there's been lots of situations where I've had to have courage, leadership courage, to be the voice for my employees, to be the voice for diversity and inclusion. And it's not always been easy.
Thank you, Tommy. And I wrote this down, so I'm going to list it out for everyone really quick. So Cindy, same question. In a leader,
yes,
what would you keep it be?
Lead with integrity. You can never go wrong with that, as long as you are leading with integrity. And as you were speaking, Tommy, I wrote down, be the voice. When you see injustice, when you see unfairness, don't sit on the sidelines. You must take actions. You've got to help those that they have a weaker voice. You have the voice, support them engage, push the limits, because we're all here to do a great job. But if someone's feeling less than, they're not going to give you 110%. And that's really what you want. So my recommendation is leading with integrity. And as long as you're doing that, treating others the way you want to be treated, you can never go wrong.
Yeah, it seems so simple, right? When you break it down, and yet, for years, assimilating or switching, and I certainly know what that was like. The first time somebody, and she's actually on here as a participant, used the word assimilation, I was like, oh my gosh, I can relate to that, because I felt I had to assimilate. I didn't know what switching was, but I certainly knew what assimilating was, and sort of losing your identity. And so some of the things, in order to start advocating, in order to start pushing and speaking up in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, both of you mentioned awareness. Both of you mentioned being intentional about your actions and making sure people had the space. You both, time and space, both mentioned, addressing the elephant quickly. And, and again, my husband has also started this company with me. That was something we always said: if you want trust, address issues of distrust. But you have to be brave enough to put those issues on the table. And feedback, most people get really scared about feedback, but feedback lets you know where you're on or off course. And if you want to know what you can do to become better, if that's part of your goals in life, to become a better human being, to become a better leader, to become a better servant, we need feedback, because we are not going to have our eyes all over the place. We may miss something. Facilitate the discussion. And we can talk about more if you want a consultation. Well, how exactly do I facilitate that discussion? How exactly? Because, it is, even with Tommy, who I've known for 10 years, Tommy, when do I use this word versus that word? Because it's, you don't want to be, well, most people don't want to be offensive. And then I like, Tommy, what you said is have the courage to be the change initiator. And you had mentioned before, and I do remember seeing it in your office, a very simple tool that you can use is, who am I including? Who am I inadvertently excluding, and I don't even realize it? So by asking that question, you could automatically become more aware and ferret out an unconscious bias, maybe even favoritism, that because, well, they're just my go-to people. And then that can escalate into particularly unequal opportunity. And then be willing to swallow the bitter pill that, maybe I'm not so perfect. And, being okay with that, being perfectly okay with imperfection, and giving people a seat at the table. So I want to thank you both for joining me on this discovery with women, diversity, equity, inclusion. And again, several of you have already put it into the chat box. If you would like a consultation with myself or Cindy or Tommy, let us know. Primarily, it's going to be sort of like, if you have the situation, what would your next step be? Completely no obligation. And with that, again, I want to say thank you for everyone for giving us your time. We hope you found something of value, and we're happy to be a servant in any way that we can. And have a great day. And thank you so much for joining us.